Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 16 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel, and let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Jack Casady. I play the bass guitar.
Nice. And you've done a lot of things, but I think we're going to start at the beginning and talk a bit about Jefferson Airplane.
All right.
We had a very strange sort of trying to get together to have this conversation. Our original conversation date was set either the day of or the day after Paul Cantor and Signe Anderson passed, which was wild and strange and surreal. It happened on the same day.
Yes, Paul Cantor and Signe Etlin Anderson. Signe passed away soon after midnight of that day, the 29th of January, and Paul passed away later on in the morning. And Paul from a heart attack and complications thereof, and Signe had died with a long illness of emphysema.
And you had been close to both of them through the...
Well, of course we're all close. I'd done some playing with Paul in the early '90s, but and Signe, I had a number of conversations with as my wife Diana Casady passed away from cancer in 2012. I passed on some of her oxygen equipment to Signe. We had some travel equipment because we went back and forth to Europe constantly. And Signe was having difficulty moving around and traveling with the oxygen equipment. So I gave a bunch of that to Signe. And we kept in contact. And whenever Jorma Kalkinen and I would come up to Portland, Oregon area, playing as Hot Tuna, we would visit and catch up with stuff,
And yourself, your health, you're doing well. You feel good.
I'm doing well. I'm a nutcase, My wife used to say, I married a musician so I could sleep late in the morning, and I get up at 5:30. She says, you get up at 5:30. You're supposed to be a musician. So I get up in the morning and I go for hikes and runs, and I love to bike ride and do all that kind of stuff. So I try to keep everything working.
Were you always a morning guy?
I beg your pardon?
Were you always a morning person?
Pretty much. I mean, naturally, with the kids back in the day, you stay up all night, but then again, you only needed 4 hours sleep a night. So,
so it's changed a lot. Now you're 72. You're still.
I'll be 72 on April 13th. Yes.
You're still playing?
I'm still playing lots.
Playing
more than ever, and I just came back from a week in Ohio, Southeast Ohio, at the opening the 19th year of the Jorma Kalkinen Fur Piece Ranch Guitar Camp with his wife Vanessa Kalkinen, and we taught out there for a week, and we did a concert, and then we got we do maybe anywhere from 100 to 150 concerts a year. Jorma plays many shows solo. We do a lot of work and are grateful for it.
That's amazing.
But the kind of music we play, unlike, as we play as Hot Tuna, Appalachian influenced music, blues, and all of our original music is that interplay. We do a lot of duo work, and the interplay and the kind of music that we choose to play is the kind of timeless music that's not associated with when you graduated high school or a movement of some kind, like say perhaps the Jefferson Airplane stuff is. So we're fortunate in being able to cross many generations with our playing and songwriting, so that we don't get too involved with the nostalgic aspect. So that keeps you sharp. It keeps you sharp. Somebody asked us recently and said, when we're doing an interview, you guys have played so much together, you must know exactly what each is going to do. And it's completely the opposite. We don't assume anything. When we hit the stage, it's brand new every night, and we try to play like it. We try to play in the moment and listen. And it's every night, is that audience sees something that's never been. It's we try to make every night is unique. If you allow it. So that's how we approach it.
Where does that come from, though? Where does that spirit come from? Is it just?
Well, I don't think it's spirit as much as if you choose the kind of music and you pursue the craft of working music, trying to interact and play. That's not into a totally rigid format. Then you're riding much more on the tightrope, so to speak, and the music is alive and relevant of the moment. It's up to you to what you're going to do. I mean, there's many genres of music and many approaches, but it's really up to your craft work and you as the musician and singer songwriter to make it relevant and immediate.
And what's the audience like?
The audience ranges everything, from we've got teenage kids coming in and 80-year-old music lovers. It ranges all over.
Is there? I mean, obviously, with the name Hot Tuna, there's a certain feel of taking me back to a time.
Well, I think that the good news is that there's a brand name with a hot tuna, of course, but also as it gets traded down from father to son or brother or sister to sister, whatever, as it gets traded around, the music gets traded around. The ultimate goal is to be relevant and to play in the moment and to play something that is accessible to everybody. So. When I was a kid, 12, 13, 14, I was listening to music, Big Spiderbeck and Eddie Condon and Jelly Roll Morton, people that had recorded in the 20s, and here I'm playing as a kid in the 50s, but and the music that I thought was really cool was a lot of the jazz music that I saw heard from the 20s and 30s. Even though at the time, I was playing rockabilly music in the late 50s and as a 14, 15-year-old and rhythm and blues and in the late 50s, early 60s, so I had influences all over from Ray Charles to Gene Vincent to Jelly Roll Morton and later on so many of the jazz guys as well.
When did rock and roll move into your lexicon? Like, was it just a sound you heard? Did you hear the term rock and roll? Like, what? Because a lot of people, you're speaking as if it's common knowledge and everyone knows this. It's hard for anybody from even my generation to imagine a time when there wasn't rock and roll. It's crazy,
right. Well, but that's the glory of the internet. You can investigate this yourself now. We did it as young musicians. I go down to the Library of Congress and listen to music, take out music from different eras, and listen to music from all over the world. Now your Library of Congress is online, so the young players that are interested will seek out music. The general population, no, they're kind of they've got other things to do with their life, so they kind of hear more or less what's played in front of them in their generation. But those that are interested in when you start to write music, you start to investigate different genres of music, and you hear a current player of the blues or a rock player or something like that, you want to find out who his influences were. And then you want to find out that guy who his influences were. And then you reach back and you start to see where things develop. But yes, we call it rock and roll, not rock. And then there wasn't different kinds of rock, so rock and roll at that time, so the rock and roll for me came out of the rhythm and blues and the rockabilly, so to speak, and merged and formed as later generations took their influences and created something different.
What were you feeling at the time in terms of what you wanted to do? Because here you were. As you were saying to me before we got on, 1956, you had picked up a guitar, 1960 electric bass.
Right.
You're sort of with Jefferson Airplane at the real early days of what became
that's 5 years later. It was 5 years later. So I was playing in 1960. I started playing bass guitar, which there weren't many of.
Right.
Most all your music, you heard Ray Charles, or you heard a lot of rhythm and blues. It was a stand-up double bass playing in those bands. Often the guitar wasn't featured as much as the sax would be featured, saxophone. So in the rockabilly world, you had guitars starting to come in, and solid body guitars, which the Fender guitar really changed the sound. So you had Carl Perkins and Gene Vincent and a lot of people in the rockabilly world start to use electric bass as well, because one reason that the Fender Precision bass came out, you started to hear the music being created with that bass guitar sound rather than a stand-up bass sound, a stand-up bass violin sound. And one of the first rhythm and blues guys to do it was James Brown. You started to hear then syncopation coming in, different kind of bass guitar syncopation coming in, as opposed to what you would hear on a stand-up bass. And that started to change the music around. So anyway, when I started playing bass guitar, I remember we all traded in different bands back in Washington, D.C., and one of my bandmates, well, Yorm and I had a band when I was 14, he was 17, 1959. And Yorm a few years older, and we did cover songs and did Johnny Cash and Gene Vincent and Buddy Holly and those kinds of players. And then he went off to college, and when he went off to Antioch, he met a gentleman named Ian Buchanan, who really changed his direction in guitar playing into the world of finger picking, and Reverend Gary Davis and people who use the thumb and finger picks in order to get much more articulation out of the guitar, but also it made his ability to make complete music on the guitar. You could have bass lines going on with a thumb, partial mixing in with partial chord work with the first two fingers. So you had a melody and a rhythm, and it wasn't like most guitar players that would play either the melodic line with a pick, lead line with a pick, and then they'd switch to rhythm, and you had a band going along with it. That was like complete music unto itself. So that was really an interesting direction that Yorma went in. I went in from guitar to start playing electric bass guitar, and found myself in all kinds of groups, playing in summertime on the summer circuits, playing country music and bluegrass music and rhythm and blues, in a lot of the club work too. So I moved around a lot of different genres within the world of bass guitar, which was brand new then. I think 1960 was the first year the Fender Jazz bass came out with a little more of a narrow neck, and it fit my hand a lot better. I liked the tone of it better, and that's what started me.
What attracted you to it, though? I mean, it's so new. The genre of music is evolving.
Well,
it's not
what
like
attracted a friend of mine, Danny Gatton, who's a well-known, fabulous guitarist, DC legend, who is now passed on. He and I were about the same age. I think he was a year younger than me. And at 16, he was the wonder kid of the guitar. I mean, he could play anything on that guitar. but he had played fiddle and banjo and a number of instruments since he was 11 years old. And there was a gig here, and we all played, and we all mixed it up in a lot of the different bands. I mean, we'd show up in different bands. The players would trade around on the club circuits, which I started playing regularly at age 15. But this was, I think I just turned 16 or something, and he had a 2-week summer gig, in a club, and when you played in a club, then you played 5 sets a night, 40 on, 20 off. You wore tuxedos and a whole bit. And generally a lot of the bands had saxes in them and Hammond organs and different combinations. Any place, in any case, his bass player was ill for this 2-week engagement, and he said, "Listen, do you know any bass players?" I said, "No." And he says, "Listen, we got his bass. He's sick. Why don't you come do the gig?" I said, "I don't know how to play bass. I never played it." He says, "Listen, it's got 4 strings. How hard can it be?" So anyway, that was the joke. But I enjoyed the bass guitar. And something just I found very enticing with that tonal range from the bass up into the cello range. And then I bought my own bass guitar, and then my work quota expanded exponentially, and I started concentrating primarily on the bass. So that when Jorma had transferred from Antioch College in the early '60s out to the West Coast, I kept in touch with him, and we were talking one night, and I said, "Listen, I'm." Because I thought of you. You know, we saw each other from time to time up in New York, and went and saw all the blues players, and when the blues rediscovered Delta blues and whatnot, it was Sun House and Mississippi John Hurt and all that in the early '60s was happening. Bob Dylan got his start, and the Holy Modal Rounders and all these groups around New York, John Sebastian. We kept in touch. When he moved out to the West Coast, we were having a conversation in 1965, and he said, "Listen, I've just joined this folk rock group." I said, "What? You the purist?" And because I'd gone off into much more rhythm and blues stuff, And he said, "Yeah." And then we're using electric instruments. He said, "Listen, what are you doing?" I said, I'm doing the usual thing. I'm going to school, college at the time, and playing a lot of the night and playing bass. He said, "I didn't know you were playing bass." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Let me call you back." So he called me back. He says, "Listen, we just started this group, and we got a manager, and he promises to pay us $50 a week whether we work or not." I said, "You're on." So I dropped out of school and came out to California, and the Jefferson Airplane was named and formed by Jorma with Paul and Marty, in July of 1965, and I came out in October.
So I hear you say that, and it's hard for me on the other end of this connection to just be like, well, that's no. I mean, it's such a crazy turn of circumstance of relationships at a time when, I really feel at that time, and I'm wondering how you feel about it, because I'm younger and I wasn't around then, but it was such a pivotal moment in music. Were you?
Well, things happen in ways. Yeah, Jorma and I have always talked about. I mean, there's no doubt that luck and timing had a lot to do with, as well as our talent, but had a lot to do with things that came together at just the right time. Now, of course, in 1965, there wasn't any big thing out there. Nobody knew about all this. Everything's very regional. You had regional record releases in Philadelphia and New York, in the South, in New Orleans. You had regional record releases in the Los Angeles area and even Oakland. Radio stations were still playing regional hits, so to speak. The communication was a lot different than you would think of it now. I would listen to the radio, a New Orleans station on AM radio that would come in late at night that I could only pick up like 3 in the morning when all the other stations would drop out, go off the air. You don't even think about that now, I could pick up Wolfman Jack from this broadcasting from Mexico, to play all this stuff from L.A. In D.C. if the weather was right at a certain conditions, and you got to hear stuff. I mean, I was a jazz fan. There was West Coast jazz with Gary Mulligan, Chet Baker, and all that. And then there was the East Coast guys that were like Coltrane, it wasn't all open up. You had to travel to go and physically get records to places, that had local talent. So when I came out to California, I really didn't know what to expect, and I didn't come out to the L.A. music scene. I came out to San Francisco music scene, which was completely ignored by Los Angeles, which was a big record industry unto itself, as Nashville was, as New York was. But in San Francisco, it was all small, contained in the San Francisco area, and kind of growing out of the beatnik area, the late 50s, you had the younger brothers of all the beatnik, jazz beatnik poets, that were going on in the late 50s and the mid 60s. You had people, in this sort of music and arts culture. There's burgeoning in San Francisco where bands were encouraged. I mean, bands were forming together as equal members within the band. We formed a band, and everybody was a financial equal partner. That never happened before.
And also, just so that we can frame things, the British invasion and the Beatles probably just happened around that moment. It wasn't like
nothing just happened. When you write about it and look at that, you look for dates for things just happened. But everything happens much slower than that, in a way that is a lot less consistent, so to speak.
Based off of the regions.
Yes, that was an interesting phenomenon itself. You had the Rolling Stones that were playing records that I grew up listening to, but were very, very regional. Muddy Waters and Little Walter and Chicago blues scene. I had all those records. My older brother, Charles Casady, which is how I met Yorma. And we were listening to all those records that were put out in the late 50s. And to hear the Rolling Stones come back with their first album with some of that material on it, influenced by that. But that influence wasn't, you didn't see that in America as much. And that was all a story unto itself. But in San Francisco, what was unique was you had people from different backgrounds, different backgrounds. I came out and joined the band, and I was probably the most professional one there, except for Marty, that had been honed and had a solo career at Columbia Records as a pop artist in the early 60s, where he was produced and made and had pop songs made. The rest of us Yorma came in through that blues folk background. Paul Cantor came in playing 12-string guitar through the Weavers folk background. I came in playing bass guitar with working in all the East Coast clubs up and down the East Coast, playing a lot more rhythm and blues and Signe had her folk influences primarily, and then later on, a year later, when there were bands like the Great Society that had Grace Slick, and Dan Hicks, God rest his soul, was in Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. They all came up through that folk circuit in the area. Jerry Garcia and Janis Joplin coming in from Texas, that settled into the Bay Area because it was a happening scene. But it was also happening because bands were forming to get their own identity within the band. It wasn't leader side man mentality. It wasn't like you have a featured singer in a backup band. So it was an interesting area of time. You had artists that were making posters later on for Chet Helms of the Family Dog venue, the promoter, and Bill Graham that was running the Fillmore, and you had electronics people dropping out of the aerospace industry and working with electronics, like did with my first basses, rebuilt the electronics and building sound and PA systems, because they didn't exist then. A PA system for a band was a PA system. I mean, there's this scratchy little thing on stage for the vocal, so all that talent that was working in electronics and came in and started working on as the music got louder with louder amplifiers, trying to get different sounds than had gone on before. Then the PA systems had to be built up around that. So a lot has happened since then.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, again, we often see the music and we think the music business, and there wasn't a business back then. And that,
believe me, there was a business, a huge business.
Right, well, true. Yeah, it was a different
absolutely, absolutely. In that sense, nothing's changed. You still have pop records being made. You still have things being manufactured out, probably more so than ever. At the same time, there's always a kernel within there. There's always you have to search out. There's always, something, some kernel of really nifty music going on at some time or another. But what you had was, San Francisco wasn't a business music town. That's probably what you're referring to.
Right.
And we were one of the, if not the first band to get signed by a major label. And then I live in Los Angeles now. We'd fly down, and get this, for $12.
Oh my God!
Fly down from from San Francisco to Los Angeles to record at Sunset and Ivar at the RCA studio, because that's the only way you could record. You had to go where the equipment was. Now you guys are all, used to, a total, 48-bit to 96-bit recording facilities in your own computer all the time.
Yeah,
all you could do is get mics.
Yeah, I can shoot 4K live video on my iPhone right now. Right
now, my father was an audiophile, so I had my little Wallensack recorder back in the late 50s. I knew something about that, but most people never heard themselves unless they got signed to a record contract to go in and record in a studio. You didn't have access to any kind of recording equipment.
But part of the charm in what I'm hearing from you, the artists, the engineers leaving to build PA systems, is that, and you're right, that's where I was going, is that in the region where you were, and there was a sort of this folk rock thing emerging, it wasn't just music or musicians being attracted to a region. You had an infrastructure where people became very artisanal about this thing.
Oh, about everything, about the way they dressed. I mean, you had the English guys that were, influenced by Kings Road and a little more nappy pinstripe suits and whatnot. But people were playing out roles. In San Francisco, you had people going back in time. You had some of the you kind of dressed your own way and had your own look. No, you didn't have to wear a band uniform on stage, so to speak. And you had the audience start to do that too, and start to dress and put combinations of clothes together, not necessarily, fashion design clothes as much as combinations of clothes from different eras and whatnot. A lot of people started reaching back in time to the turn of the century or the early 20s or something, and little wire-rimmed glasses and all that stuff. I was all part of that too. And then mixing in cultures, the Indian cultures and jewelry, and then you had people start to make their own jewelry and make their own designs rather than just wear jewelry and clothes from other other eras. So you had people in your audience that all felt that they were part of that whole community of what others term nonconformity, but it was you appreciated that there was a whole community out there that was on the same wavelength, so to speak.
And when we think about that now, we think about the San Francisco sound, we think about Somebody to Love, we think about White Rabbit, and there was this sort of integration evolution of the folk into something much heavier. And again, when people think about
absolutely, well, amplifiers and of course, it was a great, huge influence when Eric Clapton developed his sound with Cream. And Jimi Hendrix, went to England and came back with a sound, that was really showed quite dexterity and innovation, musical innovation, dexterity on the instruments. Everybody was trying to play well. Yorm and I always approached our music trying to ring out different sounds, and I was always working up and down the bass guitar to get different stuff out of it, rather than be pressed into a traditional bass and drum roll. And it was fun and very innovative. You took that innovation that you got from jazz, say, but without the style of jazz.
But with that came something that's been defined as your sound, which is this dirty sound. I mean, distortion, drive.
Well, they're different periods. I mean, I pride myself, on my acoustic bass guitar sound now too, as well as electric sound. So you go through different periods, but yes. And then the volume and the distortion you get through overdriving an amplifier, tube amplifier, was the sounds that you worked with, and that would take you and make the music different. And so as you worked with different tonal aspects that you were achieving through overdriving amplifiers, these weren't gadgets on the ground. You were using the amplifiers themselves, So that moved you into a different area. And as you got more volume and whatnot coming off the stage, then the PA systems had to be built up. They started by taking preamps and putting like Macintosh power amps with them, which were high fidelity amps, 300 watt high fidelity amps to drive these. And then they realized that they couldn't use the present day speaker system because they didn't really have good high fidelity tone. And they started making all their own cabinets and putting cabinet design together, and all of this so that it would recreate the loud sound coming out of the Stax amplifier on stage and put it out to the audience.
So again, it's sort of, you're explaining it in this technical sort of, this is the evolution, but you as an artist have this instrument, you have this amp, you have a sound that's being created. There is an artistry, an inspiration from you that said, I'm going to crank this, I'm going to build this sound.
Absolutely. I'm just saying we were taking spurs off the fact that all different people are involved in this kind of communal effort,
Right.
And when you saw a certain part of it kind of lack, then people would get in to shore that up and bring it all to a total experience. But yes, but at the end of the day, you still go back to a quiet room quietly. I go back to a room in hotel rooms, and that's how Hot Tuna was born. Yorm and I would play. He would play his acoustic guitar with finger picks and we'd start to write his own material, and we start to play it in that approach of a guitar, just a bass and a finger picking guitar, and that got us into a whole area within a few years. After we started the Jefferson Airplane with, hey, we could play this kind of music that's usually been associated with only an acoustic guitar and put it in a format that would be accessible and a much louder format, on stage.
And the idea for that, if history is true, is that Grace Slick was undergoing some sort of throat surgery and she was unable to perform, and that was sort of like, there was like this little window. Is this true where you guys in San Francisco just said, hey, let's head down to the Matrix, which was one of those
No,
clubs?
no. You got that little quite mixed up.
Okay.
We always played all the time, and you mean as far as Hot Tuna began?
Yeah.
Hot Tuna began. We played and found places to play. The Matrix is something we started with Marty Ballin started very early on. We did airplane shows down there. The Matrix was Sydney. That was in 66, 65, 66. That's how we fleshed out all our material. And we played there. Marty was part owner of that little club. And different people would come into the club, and we would play there. We started fleshing out all our material down at the Matrix, and that was great. I mean, we got to back up. That story about Grace leaving or couldn't perform and whatnot. That's sort of true. But we were always playing. We just would find any excuse to play, and we started to this material that we played in hotel rooms and all that. We started to play out in front of people, and that's what was fun. And then much later on, we even started to open up to the Jefferson Airplane. We do a Hot Tuna set before we do the airplane set.
Double duty for you.
But but exactly. And then we realized, that hey, we could start. We could play this music that didn't really fit into the folds of the Jefferson Airplane, because everybody was writing music, and there was so much music being done that we just started to play as Yorma and Jack, and later on after we made our first album with RCA in 1970, we called it Hot Tuna.
And it was a community. I mean, talk a little bit about this Jimi Hendrix Voodoo Child thing. It was a community, right? People wanted other people to play. You were brought in. You were playing on other things. That was the nature of that time, right?
Well, I think we made it that way.
Okay.
We had Jerry Garcia was on Surrealistic Pillow with us. We sat in with I sat in with the Grateful Dead guys all the time. I enjoyed that, particularly as a bass player, moving around, and I sat and did a record with Country Joe and the Fish. With Jimi Hendrix, when he first started coming in, and Bill Graham was our manager at the time, and we rehearsed next door to the Fillmore Auditorium on Geary Street. And when those guys would come in, we became friends, and we shared some bills, co-bills together. And I became friends with Mitch Mitchell, although he's a fabulous drummer, and Jimi Hendrix. And then a couple of years later, when he parted ways with his producer, Chaz Chandler, and was making his own album that later on turned out to be a double album in New York, the Jefferson Airplane was there. We were doing a TV show. I think it was, what was it? One of the late night TV shows. It was taped earlier. And he was recording in New York. We were doing a show in New York, a TV show. And I think Traffic was in New York playing at Steve Paul's Scene. And that was their first tour of the U.S. Steve Winwood with Jim Capaldi and all the gang in Traffic. So we went over to hear him about 11 o'clock at night to Steve Paul's Scene after we had finished doing the Dick Cavett show. That's what it was. And Jimmy had come in there, and we said, "Hey, how you doing?" And because we knew each other, and then Jimmy said, invited Traffic, because he knew those guys from England, and us guys back to his studio that was working on his album, and along about 7 a.m, he said, "Let's do a blues track." I said, "Fine." So it was Steve Winwood and me and Mitch Mitchell and Jimmy, and then we got in our LTD station wagon and drove down to Washington D.C. for the next night's gig.
That you don't do anymore at 72, do you, Jack?
Well, luckily we have a bus, but believe me, we do a lot of travel.
I mean, sort of like
I rented a Suburban and drove up last year in September to to Seattle with all my equipment in it. Met Yorma up there, flew in, and we did the Jazz Alley up there and some shows on the way back, and drove back here. So the short answer, not quite like that, but yes.
I meant more like at 7 a.m. and Steve Winwood and Jimi Hendrix and everyone just going.
No. Yeah, I'm saying you pretty much, yeah.
That was a special time. That was a special time. So when you think about, you mentioned earlier that you were with Yorma at the guitar camp, and there are obviously so many players who want to soak in Jack Casady and understand, because you've really spent decades doing this instrument, working this instrument, taking it from when it was a nascent instrument, even in the spectrum of music, to where we're at today. With that body of work, with your thirst for playing and performance and recording, what do you want young people who are maybe played a little or looking to pick up what do you want them to understand about this instrument?
Interesting question. I always approach the bass guitar. I think the most important thing to achieve before you go anywhere, if you're really interested in exploring the instrument itself or any instrument, is tone. I think you must establish and search out your whole. It's part of your whole life is developing your tone, that special thing that you own. And everybody's got it. Everybody's got unique DNA. And I think it isn't all about the technical aspect of the instrument and what you can do. And there's always somebody that can do something you can't do, physically on the instrument. There's always a different take. But I think you must find your own voice with the instrument. And I think that's an exciting thing, It's a searching, soul-searching endeavor to be honest with that connection between you and the instrument. It doesn't matter what instrument it is. I consider myself a musician that happens to play bass guitar.
I mean, look, I do a lot of writing, and we talk a lot about finding your voice in the writing too. And there's some authors and writers who would say, regardless of whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that sometimes it's easy to say, find your voice. Sometimes the voice is this journey that is actually the process of writing, and it doesn't really ever come to fruition. Do you look at your voice and say,
"Oh, I'm trying to find it every time I pick up the instrument." I mean, and I tell young players, I say, before you start to play, you pick the instrument up and you center yourself on the instrument. You find that place where you like the sound you're making before you start confusing yourself with a bunch of music. I mean, you want to establish your footing. The audio footing. You want to hear a good sound coming out, a pleasant and inspiring sound. Those will lead you to your notes.
And for you, talk a bit about the other side of it, the physicality of it. I mean, it's been so many years that you've been on the instrument. You have a chance to play a bunch of different instruments. You've got your own signature bass. You can play, you hollow body. There's different sort of pieces that you put together, but there's a physicality of your ability to practice your speed, your tones, how the hands work. How has that been for you in terms of your evolution too?
Well, you adapt. I mean, obviously there's certain things, and it's interesting as we passed that 50-year mark with Jefferson Airplane. We did some shows. Yorm and I put some shows together with Rachel Price and singing some of Grace's parts, and we did some exploring back into the ways we had played a lot of the Airplane material. And I was amazed, and he was amazed at the kinds of things we did as young, aggressive players, on the instrument. There's certain things perhaps I can't do in the aggressive manner that I once did, but that I'm not interested in that either. What I'm more interested in is the development and in the physical aspect of it. the more you play, the better it is. We all have, as you get older, certain arthritic conditions or whatnot, muscle issues, tendon issues that, like any athlete, you've got to warm up slowly and get up to speed on the instrument. I'm more careful about that so I don't do any damage, like any athlete. But
you've also put more years of wear and tear on your body than the average pro athlete, though.
Well, yes, but that doesn't necessarily affect the directness of your question.
Right.
But I balance that. I mean, luckily, I'm still on this side of the turf. I put something up on my Facebook a few weeks ago. I just celebrated my 26th year clean and sober. That helps. There are a lot of my friends that aren't here through drug and alcohol abuse and just abuse in general. I really enjoy keeping myself in good physical shape, which makes me a better player.
Before we cut out, talk a little bit about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think when you're in a band like Jefferson Airplane, Hot Tuna, it's a no obvious gotta be there. There's a lot of bands who sort of come and go. They don't get in. The people, what does it mean? I would imagine being a player, being a person of your stature and what you've done, it's a huge honor to be in a place like that.
Absolutely. And I used to talk this over with my lovely wife Diana, and she would say to me, because I'm not I'm not a overly secure person, I always question my worth about things. And she would say, Jack, this is a great honor, she said, because it's your peers and you should take this and just accept it as a great honor. Don't question it. It's a good thing. And I agree as well. When we're getting a Grammy, a Lifetime Achievement Award, April 23rd, from the Grammys, for our work in Jefferson Airplane. It's really cool and it's great. And we're going to do a little show there. We're going to play a couple of songs, and Yorm and I are going to put a band together, to play a couple of songs from the Airplane material. On April 23rd, there's the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award winners, I believe, is Herbie Hancock, and he's one of my heroes. I love his work. Earth, Wind, and Fire, and of course we lost Maurice out of Earth, Wind, and Fire. We lost two people out of Jefferson Airplane. I think Linda Ronstadt and Ruth Brown is being honored. Ruth Brown I used to see, at the Howard Theater back in D.C. when in late 50s. So I think that's all great stuff.
Amazing. Jack, I can't thank you enough for the time you've spent with us. I can't thank you enough for the amazing body of work and music you've provided. It's inspired so many people. You said you were on Facebook. I think it'd be great if you let people know where they can connect to you online. Where's the best place? Is it Facebook?
Yeah, that's a good place. I'm on Facebook. I just kind of dipped my toes in Facebook recently. We have Jack Casady, jackcasady.com, and you have hottuna.com, yormacalkinen.com, furpieceranch.com, all of those kind of places. You can find out what we're all up to.
And you're playing it. It's great and active, and we love to hear it. Thanks so much for your time, Jack.
Okay, you bet. My pleasure. Thank you very much.